I will tell you that if you try and do it individually, you could end up in the same scenario that my mechanics love to tell drivers they end up in at times if a driver tries to do things by himself. And I'll very quickly just tell you something that ended up a good illustration of trying to do it yourself, and maybe a bit of a hilarious illustration of how to do it yourself. See this car here? It's the fastest thing I ever drove. Fastest racing car I ever drove. Drove it at the Le Mans 24-hour race in France. It's a race that happens every year. Manufacturers go there not just to be fast, but to show how long they can run in 24 hours. This thing did 248 miles an hour down the straight in the daytime. At nighttime, even faster. 250 miles an hour in the dead of night in this thing. Along public roads, the straight was 4 miles long. But in this race, they have an unusual rule. They say the mechanics can only work on the car in the pit lane. So as you're on the 7-mile lap during 24 hours, if the car ever breaks down, you're expected to somehow jimmy rig the thing enough to get it back to the pits so the mechanics can work on it. Now, I'm fairly mechanically minded, so I know a fair bit about cars. But anyway, they show you, well, if this breaks, move the electrical connector over to here because there's a second ignition set, and if this breaks, do this, and if this breaks. And they actually give us a little toolkit in the car. We go off in the race. I was teamed with Davy Jones. We were the American arm. Davy was in Houston, Texas. The car was magic. After the first 2-hour stint, we were almost a minute in the lead. Davy comes in, I get into the car, go out. After about 2 hours, I get a message on my radio, Derek, pit next lap. And it was right before I picked top gear. I was doing 237 miles an hour before you even pulled top gear. As soon as I pulled the gear lever back, gear lever broke in my hand. And by the time I stopped this thing and pulled it off to the side, the track marshals came out and they pushed me down between the gap and the guardrail, up onto some grass, backed up against some trees. And I jumped out, and I very quickly saw what happened. The gear selector fork that's up in the cockpit that goes all the way back to the gearbox, it had broken off because somebody had drilled up the center of this tube, which is the gear selector fork, drilled up the middle to make it lighter, forgot to deburr the inside, which means they left a jagged edge. The jagged edge caused a vibration. The vibration caused a crack. And after 4 hours, it broke. But you know, there was 2 inches still sticking out. I thought if I get a vice grips wrench around this thing, yank it into any gear, I can drive this thing back to the pits. My mechanics can fix it. I've got 20 more hours. We can get back in the race. So I took the bodywork off. See where the cut word is? I took the bodywork off. I leaned in with my vice grips, leaned in over the wheel, and I got on the gearbox, and I could feel all the gears in the gearbox. But has anybody ever tried to put a car in gear without it running, like a stick shift? You know, you can't. You have to rock the car back and forth towards the gear sort of a line and then get into gear. Well, I was trying to rock the car back and forth to get this thing into gear. I couldn't do it from the side. It was too heavy. So I walked around the back. See the back wing? See how low it is on the back of the car? I walk around the back and I lean in over like this. And I got on the gearbox. But the only way that I could get this thing to start rocking back and forth was I had to start doing these pelvic thrusts as I'm bent over the back of this car. And I would rock back and forth a little bit, and I'd get it going. I was out of breath, the sweat was running off me, and I was just giving it everything. So the television cameras arrived, and my mechanics and my sponsors and my team are all back looking at the monitor in the pits thinking, what is he doing? What's he using to fix it at the back of our car? And this stage, I got it rocking, I'm giving it everything, kick, I feel it go into gear, and I am fit to be tied. I threw the tools in, I got the bodywork back on, I got inside, I put my foot on the clutch because it was in gear, fired the engine up, dropped the clutch, the thing was in reverse. So if you try to do things yourself,